인터뷰 양케와 폴리셔와 소라 장학계한 다되면 죄
So very powerful video coming out of Tbilisi, Georgia, which used to be a part of the Soviet Union. They declared their independence in 1991. There is an anti-Russian tinge to these protests, although the thousands of people that have taken to the streets are largely protesting against a controversial foreign agents draft law, which is related to one that Russia passed earlier, or last year actually. So what does this law entail? Well, it's a draft law. It hasn't been passed yet, but it's called On Transparency of Foreign Influence, and it officially targets the disclosure of money flows from abroad. But a lot of the critics within Georgia are fearing that it is a way for the government to crack down on opposing views, limit the freedom of the press, and limit freedom of speech. Now, the proposed legislation stipulates that organizations such as media outlets that could be classified as foreign agents if they receive more than 20% of their funding from abroad. The critics who talk about this say a similar law was passed in Russia, where all organizations, individuals, or charities or news outlets that receive funding support from abroad or are under any kind of foreign influence, which is a completely subjective term, are declared foreign agents. In Russia, foreign agents are required by law to label any publication, any article, anything they even post on social media with a lengthy disclaimer. They are to regularly report their income and spending, and they undergo financial audits, and any failure to do so can result in fines or imprisonment. Now, this foreign agents term comes from a Cold War era rules and laws that the Soviet Union implemented when they were trying to crack down on espionage, or at least that's the excuse they give. In reality, it was used as a hostile label for people and organizations they didn't like, and they deemed to be engaging in political activity with foreign support so they could control the messaging. Today, Russia's media watchdogs can have the right to block websites, to suppress speech, to take down articles, both print and in digital form, at the request of the Ministry of Justice without any kind of court decision. This is an absolute affront to freedom of the press and freedom of speech. And obviously there are concerns that a similar situation could be taking place in Georgia. Like in Russia, the law would likely stifle press freedom. And a large share of the independent media within Georgia gets funding, gets support from external entities such as the United Nations and the European Union. A large part of the independent media in Georgia also has people that have ties to other media outlets across the world. I mean, mainly because they print their articles. They'll write about what's going on in Georgia, and then gets printed in things like the Washington Post and various other articles or publications around the world. And just doing that alone, whether they agree to it or not, can have them labeled as foreign agents. So Georgia applied for EU membership with Moldova and Ukraine shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine in February of last year. If Georgia were to pass such stifling laws on freedom of the press and freedom of the speech, a lot of the issues with why the EU leader haven't granted Georgia formal candidate status like they did to Ukraine and Moldova once again rise up. You can't really be a part of the European Union if you're stifling freedom of the press and freedom of speech. And this would limit any kind of funding opportunities eventually that could come to Georgia, as well as somewhat of a pathway to potentially getting some security guarantees against Russia. The Prime Minister of Georgia, who has a very long name that's difficult to pronounce, is the chair of the pro-Russian Georgian Dream Party. Pro-Russian is a bit of an extreme. It's more Russia-leaning than the other parties, but he has said that this bill makes sense because it would help root out those working against the interests of the country, as well as work against the interest of the very powerful Georgian Orthodox Church. Similar to the Russian Orthodox Church, the intermixing of politics and religion in those countries is a little more prevalent than we see in the European Union or even the United States. However, the president of Georgia, who has an equally difficult name to pronounce, is a political independent, and she also is a pro-European leader. So she said she would veto the bill if it were to pass because it violates the Constitution of Georgia and its freedom of the press, freedom of speech rules within their constitution. Now, Russia, obviously, not a big fan of these protests because they do have an anti-Russian tinge. Basically, this law in Russia was passed nearly in entirety by rings of support, and lots of the Duma were very happy to control the narrative in Russia. And to see other countries doing similar, it makes them happy because it's almost like misery loves company. Whenever Xi Jinping cracks down on things, Russia supports them because Russia also cracks down on things that are deemed dangerous to the Kremlin. So I'm about to show you this clip where these Russian pundits talk about how these anti-Russian protests being carried out are just more of the global Nazism prevalent around the world, trying to undermine the benevolent Russia, which we all know is complete bullshit. They love to throw around the term Nazi almost as much as they love to throw around the term nuclear weapon. And they implore Georgia to just join Russia and help reunify the Soviet Union in its old glory, and they will be rich and prosperous yet again. And we know that's complete nonsense because the old USSR was neither rich nor prosperous. So here you go.
Не будут жить так богато они в Советском Союзе. Есть только на чужбине. Чем-то как-то зарабатывать. И самое главное, Грузия может на примере Украины увидеть, что значит агрессивная нацистская политика от украинской верхушки и как Грузия выиграла от того, чтобы не втянулась в конфликт. Да? Потому что для Грузии это катастрофа, это уничтожение нации. Их толкают вот в этот процесс. Надо четко понимать, чтобы постсоветское пространство вышло на траекторию развития, ушла от тех проблем демографических, экономических, социальных. Конечно, нужно экономическое, а лучше и политическое объединение в единое пространство, как было в Советском Союзе. Сейчас это население